All right, let's get right into this. We're going to unpack a fascinating story about a politician who, our source material argues, basically saw the future. We're talking about a quiet, small town doctor from Texas who supposedly predicted America's biggest crises, like decades in advance. And we're also going to look at why the establishment, everyone from the media, all the way to figures like Jeffrey Epstein, apparently couldn't stand him for it. So, picture this. It's the early 2000s. The country is still reeling, but totally united after 9/11. The economy seems okay, and you just don't really question the government's authority. Now, what if one guy stood up in Congress and just laid out a roadmap of everything that was about to happen? We're talking a massive financial crash, endless wars, a dollar that's worth less and less, and a growing police state right here at home. Well, according to our source for this explainer, Tucker Carlson, a congressman named Ron Paul did exactly that. And you know what he got for telling these really uncomfortable truths? He wasn't celebrated. He was hated. So we're going to explore that claim and try to figure out the real reasons behind the incredible backlash he faced. And this slide right here, this gives you a real window into just how deep that animosity went. This is a line from an email sent to the infamous Jeffrey Epstein back in 2012. You've got the powerful and connected chatting about foreign policy, and who do they single out? Ron Paul. He's this irritant, this obstacle. The source makes it clear this wasn't just some political disagreement. No, this was a deep personal contempt held by some of the most powerful people in the country. But why? I mean, really, why? To get that, we have to understand the man that they were so worked up about. So, who exactly was this person who got such a strong reaction? Well, the picture our source material paints is completely the opposite of the public attacks you might have heard. Our source, Tucker Carlson, describes Ron Paul not as some fire-breathing, wild-eyed radical, but as just a manifestly decent person. This was a doctor who delivered over 4,000 babies, a guy who's been married to the same woman since the 50s, and someone who consistently preached nonviolence. Carlson, who actually spent time with him, even calls him the least angry white man in America. You put that image up against the vicious public persona that his opponents created, and it makes you ask a very simple question. What on earth did he say that was so threatening? The answer, according to the source, really boils down to two core ideas. And these weren't just small little policy disagreements, you know? No, these were fundamental challenges to the entire way Washington, D.C. had been run for decades, a consensus that was shared by both Republicans and Democrats. Okay, so the first radical idea was his relentless focus on money. Seriously, while every other politician was talking about taxes and spending, Ron Paul was talking about the nature of the US dollar itself. He was obsessed with this thing called fiat currency. And all that means is money that has value simply because the government says it does, not because it's backed by a real physical thing like gold. And here's the crucial point he kept making. Back in 1971, the US officially went off the gold standard. Paul argued this was a total disaster. He said it basically untethered our money from reality, and it let the government and the Federal Reserve just print money whenever they wanted, with no limits. He warned that this wasn't some abstract economic theory, it had real consequences. Every new dollar they printed made the dollars in your wallet, in your savings account, worth a tiny bit less. He saw it as a hidden tax, a sneaky way of slowly stealing the wealth of ordinary people. Back then, this was considered crazy talk, just fringe gold bug stuff. But Paul insisted it was the single most important issue facing the country. And this slide just lays out the clash perfectly. On one side, you have the establishment view. The Fed is this wise group that manages the economy for us, and sending the military overseas is just what we have to do to keep America safe. And then, on the other side, you have Ron Paul's totally different take. The Fed is an engine of inflation that makes you poorer, and foreign wars are a catastrophic waste of lives and treasure that don't actually help the country. See? He wasn't just nibbling around the edges of policy, he was taking a sledgehammer to the two main pillars of modern American power, its money and its military. So, how did the powers that be respond to all this? Well, not by debating his ideas. Nope. According to the source, they responded by trying to destroy the man who was saying them. It was a full-on campaign, not of intellectual argument, but of pure character assassination. Our source actually gives a first-hand account of how this worked. Back in 2007, Tucker Carlson wrote a profile of Paul. He says that just days after he filed the story, his editor called him up, suddenly armed with a bunch of opposition research, claiming Paul was a bigot.
Then the magazine turns around and runs a cover story with the headline, Angry White Man, a label Carlson says is just absurd for the least angry guy he'd ever met. The source argues this wasn't journalism. It was a coordinated smear campaign to make Ron Paul so personally toxic that nobody would even dare listen to his ideas.
And the attacks got even more wild and unhinged during Paul's next presidential run. This slide shows a tweet that the source highlights from a young Ben Shapiro during a Republican debate. Paul was on stage questioning U.S. foreign policy, and Shapiro accuses him of, well, wanting to strangle Jewish people. The source presents this as a perfect example of the slander they used. See, instead of actually debating Paul's argument that maybe another war wasn't in America's best interest, his critics just accused him of harboring this murderous anti-Semitic hatred. It was a tactic designed to shut the conversation down, period.
But this is where we get to the absolute heart of the source material's argument. Why all the panic? Why the completely over-the-top slander? The source claims it's because the thing that truly terrified the establishment wasn't that Ron Paul was wrong, it's that he turned out to be right.
So let's jump into Time Machine. The year is 2002. It's only a year after 9/11, the dot-com bubble had just burst, but the huge housing bubble was just getting inflated. The country was getting ready to invade Iraq, and it was in that environment that Ron Paul stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and laid out his vision of the future. And what he said then, it is just striking to read today. I mean, 6 years before the 2008 financial crash, he predicted a massive credit expansion. He saw a worsening dollar crisis and a return to gold as a safe haven asset. He predicted that both military power overseas and police power right here at home would expand, and that both Democrats and Republicans would support it. He said Americans would become poorer and less free, and that the wars in the Middle East would end up dividing the country. Our source describes these predictions as having a spooky precision. He basically saw almost every major political and economic trend of the next 20 years.
So, the big question is, how did he do it, right? How did this one congressman see so clearly what all the experts, all the think tanks, and all the other politicians completely missed? Did he have a crystal ball or something?
Well, the source argues the answer is surprisingly simple. Ron Paul wasn't some kind of economic wizard or a geopolitical genius. He was, at his core, a moralist. He had a very, very basic framework for looking at the world, and he just applied it consistently to everything, especially to the actions of the government. And this is it. This is the framework. It's literally the stuff you learn as a little kid. Lying is wrong. Stealing is wrong. Killing is wrong. The source argues that Paul's incredible insight came from applying these basic, universal moral rules not just to you and me, but to the state. He'd ask, is printing money that devalues people's savings a form of stealing? Yes. Is starting a war based on false information a form of lying and murdering? Yes. By asking these simple moral questions about really complex government policies, Paul was able to predict their disastrous outcomes. Because as the source suggests, actions that are fundamentally immoral will inevitably lead to bad results. And so this explainer of the source material leaves us right here. We've walked through the story of a politician who was ridiculed and smeared for his ideas that the source claims have been completely vindicated by time. And his predictive power, it's argued, didn't come from some complex analysis, but from a simple, almost childlike moral clarity. And that leaves us with one final, provocative question. In a world full of unbelievably complex problems, are we better off searching for ever more complex solutions, or is the most powerful tool for seeing the future and for building a better one just a simple set of unchanging moral principles?